Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you Capitalism Hits Home, a podcast about the intersection and interpenetrations of personal life with political, economic, and social life in the United States. Today, I want to talk about loneliness and how the left might address that and what it means, because America is in a terribly severe mental health crisis. Look it up on Google. You'll know all about it. There's a Harvard report written in 2021 that said alarming numbers of Americans are lonely. 36% reported feeling lonely either frequently or almost all the time. And 61% of young people aged 18 to 26 and 51% even with mothers with young children reported miserable degrees of loneliness. Extreme loneliness is not only psychologically damaging, it's as damaging as smoking 15, that's most of a pack of 20 cigarettes every day. And health risks from prolonged loneliness take around 10 to 15 years off people's life expectancy. The left really hasn't appreciated the benefits of an organization to helping the loneliness that plagues Americans' lives, and the connection and feelings of hope and love, even, although that sounds corny, that we can feel, and the end to the loneliness we can accomplish. But if we appreciate that aspect of left political activity, we can build and strengthen the left. That does sound a little woo-woo, I suppose, and a little bit mysterious, but it actually isn't. It was much more part of the left when the left was huge in the United States. And that in 1911, there was an enormous strike, the textile strike, called the Bread and Roses strike in the Lawrence Mills. Lawrence, Massachusetts was a city of enormous number of textile mills. They all went on strike together, which was amazing because the women, overwhelmingly women who worked there, spoke 51 different languages and were from 51 different countries, but they hung together in the strike. There were some men as well, but it was an overwhelmingly female trade and female strike. And their theme song, which stayed as with the symbol of socialism, of bread and roses, was this, and I find it really relevant. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. The people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are in the struggle, and together we shall win. Our days shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient calls for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their trudging spirits new. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall. The rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and the idler, 10 that toil where one reposes, but sharing of life's glories. Bread and roses, bread and roses. So the solidarity and love that the strikers wanted sustained them. It even sustained them through the harsh winter months when they were out of work, and they were not people with savings. However, unions from the IWW, because they struck with the International Workers of the World, the IWW, a very militant left union. Other members took their children in for the winter and fed them and gave them warm clothes until the strike was over. The strikers knew that they weren't alone. They weren't anymore toiling alone, 16 hours a day and then going home and collapsing. They were connected and they had huge new energy, even though they were very poor and struggling. Actually, workers who go on strike usually never do make back the income that they lost while they were out on strike, but what they make back is a future and a sense of being together and not alone, and a sense of being important and having power. And that they have a better future together because they were connected. So, in spite of the fact that it's scientifically reinforced that isolation and loneliness is physically and psychologically dangerous, the left really hasn't taken advantage of that and stressed the commitment to devotion and connection that people can get if they are united. And that's particularly important that those forms of connection are now, because they're an antidote to the Trumpian division of us. Fascism begins by separating and dividing men and women, by positing men as superior and women as inferior and designated to serve men. The Nazis had a slogan for women, Kirche, Küche, and Kinder, kitchen, church, and children. That's what women should do. And recently, Vance, the vice president under Trump, said that women's mission is to produce children. Women over 50 have one job, and that's to take care of grandchildren, and that there ought to be a fine against women who don't have children. And that's a way of shunting women away from men. Trump's fascistic division of cisgender people from LGBTQIA people is another disconnection. And brown people from white people is another disconnection by stressing that all diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives should be ended. They separate out white, particularly white men, from other people, because the more the mass of people can be unified, the more they can fight against fascism. I don't think that they could deport people if they didn't have the idea that it's okay to deport migrants because they're foreigners. That's another division, the foreigner and the Native American. They create a fascist community by uniting people against other people, men against women, whites against blacks, native-born Americans against migrants, cisgender Americans against non-cisgender Americans, Christians against non-Christians. The most popular series ever in the United States is called The End Times. It's really for evangelicals. And in the last of the books, they state, which actually many evangelicals believe, that Jesus is going to come back for a second coming. And he's going to come back to Israel only if it's in Jewish hands. Can't be in Arab hands to come back. And then when Jesus comes back, all people who are born again as evangelical Christians will go to heaven, and everyone else will be tortured as they burn to death. Not very generous, that idea, that all those people will burn to death, but that's the message of end times. The left really needs to emphasize our connection to the 97% of us who are employees, not employers. Of course, if employers want to join, that's great. But that the 97% has to establish a social, just world with a decent life and bread and roses for all of us. And we have to use all the powers that connect. One of those powers is singing. Singing has been a really important part of movements. It was certainly a big part of the civil rights movement. Music bonds people in church also. It's a sense of lifting all of our voices to a powerful voice. It's a kind of analogy for what we would do to create social justice. Well, how can we do that? Well, I'm going to present a few ways. One way is we have to be aware that that's an important aspect of joining a left movement, that you have connection with other people in hope. And we have to accentuate that you are part of a community, and a community that is connected in hope. Here we really need codes of conduct that enforce connection. So, for example, we need to welcome critical voices. We can't be politically judgmental. We have to admit and acknowledge our need for each other in order to win. That we need everyone, and we have to discourage hierarchies of whose voice is more important to be heard, who has greater authority because they're more oppressed, or because they're brown, or because they have more experience. And here we should look to the most successful social movement in America. The most successful social movement is AA and the 12 steps. Every little rural town you can go to in the United States has an AA or a connection to a nearby Alcoholics Anonymous, that's AA, program. AA is a collective organization. They have 12-step programs which draw millions and millions of Americans who had previously resorted to very self-destructive, isolated habits like drinking or taking drugs. By joining together in free of charge 12-step groups, particularly in AA, people are able to connect their pain that drove them to alcohol in a supportive and non-judgmental collective, learning from other people who suffer from the same problems. They also get something called a sponsor, a person who looks out for them in the organization to make sure they're okay. Now, why does 12-step work? Well, it works because it helps people acknowledge they have a problem and that they need each other. If you go to an AA meeting, everyone goes around and introduces themselves with their first name because it's an anonymous organization. They say, let's say, I am Harriet and I'm an alcoholic, not I'm Harriet and my mother's an alcoholic. No, they take responsibility that they have a problem and that's why they're there. And that they can't solve, it also does a very important social thing. It teaches their members and enforces the lesson that they can't solve their problem all alone. They need the group's assistance. They need a community. And in that community, they discover that no matter how they felt alone, they're really not alone. Their problems are not uncommon. They're shared. They're shared within an environment of support and connection of other people who suffer from the same thing. It isn't an expert who tells you what to do. It's someone else who's hurting, who shares with you. And members listen, validate, and each other's personal stories so that everyone can share what others experience and thoughtfully get energized by the fact that they are not alone. We used that same method in the women's liberation movement in its inception. We called it consciousness raising, where you came to a meeting, you talked about the problems we all face, and found that we had an agenda from that because we had common problems. We weren't each alone in our isolated household. So, since this is the most successful social program in America, I think the left could learn from it, and it could help us build the political development and support that we really need. Because the 12-step programs show us that millions and millions of Americans yearn to connect with other people who experience the same problems that we do. Also, connect in an environment without an assigned leader who's superior and elected to be above everybody else, or who's the expert, but another person from the group there is no hierarchy. We're supposed to connect and learn together. Where do the multiple threats come? Threats to our happiness and well-being. In order to check out AA and how it could relate, I looked at the red book, which is the basic book for Alcoholics Anonymous, and its synopsis in the little red book that sets up the precepts of AA. And I thought about how the slogan of the 60s was the personal is political. And that's really true. Why not connect and learn together from our personal experiences and create a community that can act together? And so in order to do that, I adapted the AA 12 steps, which are the process that members go through for a leftist, but I adapted it for a leftist agenda. The growth of political connection and power so that everyone in America could be empowered. The first step in the 12 steps is we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol. This is in AA, in NA, Narcotics Anonymous, you'd say we were powerless over narcotics, that our lives became unmanageable. If we adapted that step one, we could say we understand that one person alone can't solve chronic societal problems that are making our personal and public lives unmanageable. The second step for AA is we came to believe that only a power greater than ourselves could restore us. Our adaptation for the left could be we have come to believe that only a collective, which is a power greater than our individual selves, can help move our nation and ourselves personally towards healthier, more just, and democratic practices through connection. The next step for AA is we made the decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. Note, it's male. The left alternative to step 3 could be we decided to commit time, energy, will, and belief in the future, to work together for change that will make our lives better, all of us together. The fourth step is, for AA, We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of our lives. The fourth step for a left organization could be we took a serious and thorough moral measure of our own selves, noting the ways that we collude with societal forces for our own and others' exploitation, and noting our embrace of practices and beliefs about ourselves that make us vulnerable to being manipulated and belittled. This is an important step. We need to be aware that we are not just victims of what's out there. We are also collaborators in our oppression. We're not helpless. We can act together to change. What we need to do is unite around basic principles and create programs to achieve the goals and connections that we need. Step 5 in AA is we admitted to God and to ourselves and other human beings the nature of our wrongs. Our adaptation could be we have admitted to ourselves and out loud to others the ways we collaborated with our own victimization and that of others. The 6th step for AA is we are ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And our adaptation could be we're working to move beyond dysfunctional behaviors by taking action to better our own and each other's lives. Some members may also take support from religious or spiritual beliefs as a private matter. Everyone's contributions enrich everyone else's. The next 7th step in AA is we humbly ask Him, that's the male God, to remove our shortcomings. Our 7th step could be we ask for and are ready to give the much needed support that'll help us unlearn collusion, competition, and self-individual blame, and internalize new knowledge and wisdom that comes through our joint efforts and which is so necessary for our own growth with each other. We ask for and will give support to help us rebound from the disappointments, disillusionments, as well as the triumphs that we have. The Red Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, step 8 is we'll make a list of all the persons we have harmed and become willing to make amends to all. Our version could be we're studying to fill the gaps in our knowledge of our own selves and of U.S. history, to grasp the different realities lived by the different groups within our society, from the Native Americans to the present. We study the systemic arrangements, economic, political, and psychological terrains of class and color, poverty and wealth, privilege and persecution. We can look at the marvelous, the shameful, the horrible, and the beautiful. We do this not just to discover and learn and acquire knowledge for its own sake, but to inform our thoughts about the dignity of life, creating change, and building a better future. The 9th step is we will draw up a list. This is the 9th step of AA, of persons we have harmed, and make amends to them directly, except if to do so would injure them or others. We take a moral measure of ourselves, and when we're wrong, we admit it. We might substitute for that. We work to promote and demand from our government, federal, state, and local, fair and domestic policies that support Americans' effort, all of Americans' efforts, to live healthy, productive lives. We promote humane, respectful, non-exploitative relationships with each other and foreigners, to encourage peaceful relations between us as people and other nations in planet Earth. The 11th step of the 12 steps for AA is we seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. For our 11th step, we could say we seek through experience, study, meditation, imagination, songs, discussion, and listening to each other, greater understanding, knowledge, and consciousness of ourselves and the human conditions of life, the better to connect with others in developing a better world together. The 12th step in AA is, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in our affairs. Well, our 12th step could be, having come to realize by taking these 12 steps that certain structural characteristics of U.S. society hinder Americans' pursuit of happiness. Having also realized the ways in which some of our own actions reinforce difficult outcomes, we experienced an invigorating moral, ethical, political, and spiritual awakening. Feeling the changes within ourselves, wrought by connecting with each other, we're motivated to reach out and sympathetically and supportively create connection with whoever we can. We ask each other here to do the same. Our collective plans create hope, connection, and action. We are powerful, and we will reap a sustainable future. Those powerful steps can inspire and inform the left as well as Alcoholics Anonymous. We can use them in whatever ways make sense for a united movement. We won't demand orthodoxy. We certainly wouldn't want that. We'll ask for our members to join in whatever way works for them. That's what AA does, and it's a good idea. But these are concepts. They're not recipes of what to do. However, they add the much needed connection and community that America needs, not to be so lonely, isolated, and politically right-wing. Thank you. Goodbye for now.